Bang! What is up, folks, and welcome back to another edition of the Daily Crypto Byte. Today is Monday, October 18th, and we're getting a little bit of pullback to start the day here. Plenty of uncertainty creeping into the markets, lots of fear around China's GDP report. We'll talk about that and a whole lot more. CJ's got some interesting stuff to talk about in terms of Bitcoin dominance and what we're seeing in the market as a whole. But before we get started, John, how you doing? CJ? Know you're in Dallas this week watching our boy Tommy Joe Martins take on the Dallas Motor Speedway. I'd like to hear about that as well. So, how are you guys doing?
Doing well so far today, Mont. Doing well. Better than Mark Yusko.
Yeah, Dallas was a good time. We had the honor of hosting some Navy SEALs and their families, former veterans. So it was really nice to be able to spend some time with them and thank them for their service and whatnot. Also, Tommy did a nice job in the race, finishing ahead of Landon and the Voyager squad. But yeah, went out to dinner with the Voyager crew afterwards, and I think they got some really exciting things. It's always really nice to talk about that and collaborate. But even more exciting, Bitcoin over 60K and reaching almost 63K this weekend. So we're going to break that down and talk much more about it. But like Monty said, a little bit of pullback here to start the day.
And how much of that do you guys credit with people like Mark Yusko saying that, we're due for a pullback? I think we're overbought here and so forth.
I don't think it's too much of that. I think it's mostly just profit taking given the price action we've seen over the last couple of weeks. We also have what seems like a bit of uncertainty in the traditional equity markets. But I'd actually like to get your take on that, Doc. We're starting the week here, fresh week. And I've seen so far on Twitter this morning, it seems like there's a bit of uncertainty in terms of, what we could potentially see in the global markets this week. And historically, we've seen that bleed over into Bitcoin. Based on what you're seeing so far, what type of week are you expecting in the traditional equity markets and in sort of the global markets here?
Well, I think a lot of them will. We've got that Apple event today, guys. That will be at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 o'clock Central. And we think we know what it's about, of course. And it's not the new iPhone. That, of course, the 13, they already did that. So this is supposed to be about the redone Mac. And, if that's indeed what it's going to be about, fantastic. Anxious to see what it is. But I think overall it's going to be a question of do the inflationary pressures keep mounting at the speed which they've been mounting? And as I have sort of liked to coin this phrase, the companies that deliver things in boxes, that sell you things in boxes, not because of the cardboard, but those companies are going to be far more challenged because, even if it's a computer chip in a little tiny box, we're talking about something that has to be delivered to you, not over the internet like Microsoft delivers its products, like Google, like Netflix, like Amazon Prime, for that matter. And Amazon Web Services. Those parts of Amazon's business, gangbusters. The part where they have to deliver boxes, very challenging. So I think if you have to deliver something physical to people, I'm going to be anxious to see how much more demand there is than supply, how far out into the future they think that it'll take to make those things trade at more of an equilibrium. And that's what I'm focused on this week, Monty.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think a lot of that will definitely bleed over into the crypto markets as well. It seems like it already is. CJ, I think you made a great point in the chat this morning, talking about how although the entire market, crypto market, is kind of turning down, Bitcoin dominance is still leading the way, still kind of the most one of the most important metrics to look at. So I would really like to take a look at that chart. I think you have some pretty interesting insights to share, so I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, and the important thing I think to be clear about with Bitcoin dominance is not necessarily whether or not, I wouldn't get caught up in the number. of 45% or whatnot, because over time, as the space and industry grows and matures, that number is going to gradually trend down as more projects take up more capital in the space. However, in the short term, the way that we can locate alt seasons is by noticing changes in that trend in the short term. So I will get to that weekly chart and show how the trend for Bitcoin dominance has not yet entered anything that we would call an alt season. But first, I do want to recap some of the Bitcoin charts because we were kind of retracing over the weekend. We were going down to 60K, and then it just got bought up really quickly, which I thought was pretty interesting. A little bit of a head fake out that we had over the weekend, but I do want to dive into the charts and be a little bit more specific. Starting off, just going to highlight one of Willy Woo's former charts, that we are really reaching peak accumulation, and the supply shock is getting really real here in the terms of where we've been historically and how that has led to parabolic increases. Check out what we saw in the depths of the 2018 bear market, and then shortly following the COVID crash after the May of 2020 halving. These were instances of very large accumulation, and we are still in that kind of arena. So I think it bodes very well for the overall macro trend. Being said, I think the one thing that we have to look out for in the short term, and I think Monty did a really nice job of highlighting this on the cocktail hour, was the fact that when we get these options and futures open interests really increasing like very quickly and having these really steep spikes, they usually lead to short liquidation events and short pullbacks on the way to a much larger uptrend. And so while I do think the supply shock is going to drive us to much higher prices in the coming weeks and coming months, I would be careful and cautious here due to the fact that we've gone up very quickly and we've had a 45% increase in a very short period of time in terms of Bitcoin futures open interest. And as you can see before, last time we had a very sharp increase in spike, the derivatives of this market really led to kind of that liquidation event. So I'd be cautious about that. But being said, I'm still extremely bullish going into these next few weeks and then into the end of the year. But a pullback or a short liquidation in the interim would not be out of the realm of possibility. Also, another instance of what we have is exchanges and their inflows and outflows. And as you can see, we actually are returning to a neutral area when it comes to outflows. So kind of similar to what we saw at the start of December of 2020, and then slowly as we kind of crept into the new year. But just kind of an interesting metric that I thought we should be aware of. In terms of Bitcoin dominance and what Monty had originally discussed, it's more about the trend, as I said, than compared to just the overall number. Once we started to see Bitcoin dominance roll over here after the increase from 18 to 30K in the initial rally, we really began that alt season and it kind of consolidated. But then when it really dropped off, that's when we were seeing things like Shiba Inu, Dogecoin really go parabolic. Then once the market crashed in May and we had that liquidation cascade all the way down to 29K, Bitcoin typically outperforms altcoins because it is the most resilient in market downturns. And, that's natural because a lot of the altcoins are typically high beta names. Then following that consolidation, we had that mini altcoin season that was led by assets like Solana, Luna, AVAX, and many others. That brought Bitcoin dominance down. But now, ever since we've started to rally from 45K to 60K, Bitcoin dominance is still on the rise in terms of the weekly chart. So until we see a macro turnover or a very clear change in trend like what we saw here and like what we saw here, I'm going to remain pretty strong in Bitcoin and ETH and the larger caps. Then if we see a true downtrend and a start of a next altcoin season, that's when I'll really look towards a lot of the high cap alts that we've been talking about. But that's kind of how Monty and I see the flow of capital in the space and how it rotates from Bitcoin to then altcoins.
Yeah, absolutely, CJ. I think you explained that flow of capital very well. And I quickly want to mention a few things about ETH because I think that they, kind of tie into what CJ was just mentioning there. I'm pretty bullish on ETH right now. I think that in terms of what we're seeing overall from kind of a macro perspective in crypto, I think ETH is poised well to see some speculation here to close the year. And I just want to share quickly why I think that. So let's take a look at, I want to take a look at this chart right here. This is Ethereum options open interest. And what we see typically, like CJ was just talking about, ETH is ETH is the largest cap altcoin if you consider it an altcoin. And I've said this many times, but I kind of see it as the gateway to the alts. And one thing that is really important to look at with ETH is the fact that it gains speculation from both the retail side and also the institutional side as well. So although the performance to um, of ETH relative to Bitcoin has been relatively underperforming, I still think what we're seeing on chain and kind of behind the scenes is boding very well for some end of year price action. So as you can see here, the since the start of the month of October, the options open interest has been steadily building. I keep making the comparison back to 2020, but in October of 2020, we saw a very similar build in open interest. This implies that institutions and big players are making speculative bets on ETH for the end of year, and I think that's it explains some of the price action we've been seeing, and also it fits in well with what CJ was just talking about in terms of that flow of capital model, what we're seeing in Bitcoin dominance, and what may happen if we start to see perhaps some capital rotating out of Bitcoin and starts to rotate downstream. I think ETH could definitely be one of the first benefactors of that, and I think that's supported as well by this options data. So we'll be watching that. I think watching what we're seeing here on chain with ETH, as well as watching what we're seeing in Bitcoin dominance, really kind of will tell the tale here for the crypto market going forward. But one thing I did want to mention as well here is a pretty big news related article that Bob mentions in the comments here. Can you guys talk about your thoughts on ETFs and their potential effect on the market? So obviously there was a lot of buzz last week about some crypto ETFs being approved, not obviously direct Bitcoin ETFs will be holding Bitcoin directly, but rather futures ETFs. And that led to some pretty volatile price action this weekend. Lots of people speculating. Want to get your guys' thoughts on what you think this ETF approval process could mean. What do you think, this imminent approval could mean for the market, whether or not we'll see, a quick effect or it will be a delayed effect? Doc, any thoughts on the ETF scenario here?
Yeah, it's the first to be approved, and they could approve a slew of them, but the first to be approved, it seems, based on all the chatter, is going to be ProShares. These are all going to be Bitcoin futures ETFs, and the issue here is the same issue as the USO, as BOIL, which is a double natural gas contract, natural gas futures contract that I've talked about. The volatility is an awful lot higher in these for a host of reasons, but the easiest to understand is futures expire. This is not like owning a coin, which has no expiration, just like a stock doesn't have an expiration. So if you're trading a future, at some point you have to roll. And that roll becomes, on one hand, problematic, on the other hand, a real opportunity. Friend of ours, Mark Fisher, his firm makes a market in the futures that trade right now, of course, at the CME, but they trade as futures, not as a flesh and blood stock certificate ETF, exchange traded fund on a future. Those are going to be far more volatile, and especially volatile around expiration. Now, just quick, Monty, the difference between a future and an option is this. An option could be something or nothing. A future is a good face margin deposit that you're committing to buy or sell, and you've already done it. There's no strike price for a future. Yes, there are futures options, but if you buy a future of anything, natural gas, Bitcoin, whatever it might be, gold, you are making a commitment that at expiration, you will either own that security or that commodity in most of those cases, because most of the futures are on commodities, or it will turn in some cases to cash. But in any case, if you're somebody trading an ETF, that ETF does not expire. So that means that you give $100,000 to Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, whatever, and they buy you that Bitcoin ETF that's on the futures. That contract is a perpetual, and the decay of that future, the premium, because of course it's going to trade at a premium, right? Because there's an arbitrage if it doesn't. If it trades at too much of a premium, people will sell the future and buy the actual Bitcoin. If it trades under a certain price, they will buy the future and sell the Bitcoin and so forth. That's what they do all day long. And that's how they keep that equilibrium. It's basically priced. If you put $100,000 in the bank today, 3 months from now, how much interest would you earn? That's how much the differential should be for that contract over the spot price of Bitcoin, for instance. So when that future expires, let's say you're trading, for instance, a 3-month out future, when that final days of that 3-month future are upon you, they are rolling the ETF will have to roll to the next, depending on, you have to read the fine print, but do they roll to a monthly? Do they roll to, I imagine all of these guys are going to be pegged to the CME because that's a listed futures exchange rather than some of these disparate offshore exchanges. But that's when you're going to see the volatility, and the volatility will be most intense during those rolling periods. And it's not always the final 3 days, because what if that Bitcoin contract, the ETF contract, says that in the final 30 days, we will have rolled 50% of our Bitcoin futures to the next 3-month out future. And then as we get into the final week, we will roll the rest or whatever. You put those marks on the calendar and you say, here's where it's going to be volatile. Here's where it's going to be volatile. You just have to read the fine print. It won't take long for people to get used to it. But since these expire versus letting them actually buy Bitcoin itself, that's where the volatility is going to come from. All you got to do is look at a natural gas contract or the oil contract last year when it went negative. It went negative because nobody could find storage. And it was going to be delivered in Cushing, Oklahoma. So if you had those contracts, you needed out of those because you took on the obligation to accept that crude oil in Cushing, Oklahoma, and you don't have anywhere to put it.
Yeah, that's, it's really interesting, John, with these new vehicles for investment in crypto, obviously comes all these new complexities in the market. And I think a lot of people have been looking to the immediate effect of this ETF, but I really think that if you take a step back and think about what this really means for crypto and how far Bitcoin has come, just in the last 2 years, or take a step back and look at the last 10 years. I mean, this is a publicly traded investment vehicle that really legitimizes Bitcoin. And, we were talking with some people in our community about it this weekend, but one thing that really seems less prevalent this year is kind of the fear that Bitcoin could go to zero. I know, the guy from The Big Short is saying that it's a bubble that could go to zero, but you don't hear that nearly as often as you did 1 year ago, 2 years ago, and basically exponentially as you go back. And I think a lot of that has to do with these new legitimate investment vehicles that allows, a new sector of capital to get into the space. So I think we're on, a frontier of something very exciting, but I think it's great that, we have people like you, John, that have experience trading futures and options and can apply that experience to, this new frontier in crypto. So I think there's going to be a ton of money to be made here over the next couple of years. And I think that right now what we're seeing with this ETF approval, right, seeming imminent, I think it's really just the beginning of a new form of investment vehicles into Bitcoin. So really, really exciting time. But we're running a little bit long here, fellas. Any doges of the day you're looking at? as we start the week here? CJ? Oh, you're muted, my friend.
Thank you for that. Just to recap what we had mentioned earlier, still holding just long, heavier weighted in BTC and ETH as well. I talked about that open interest for both Bitcoin futures and options really increasing parabolically, and how we've gotten liquidations historically after seeing those increases. I'm still holding spot. I'm not necessarily taking profit. I think it's a dangerous place here not to be long, because we could go to 70K very easily with some FOMO with the supply shock here. But also we could see, a 5 to 10% liquidation in Bitcoin to the downside. So, I'm still holding spot, and I'll be not too upset with either of those situations, because even if it does fall, it gives us another opportunity to potentially buy the dip. So that's just my outlook, though.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, CJ. And based on what we started the show with, you talking about the Bitcoin chart, Bitcoin dominance. Right now, I want to be heavily weighted in Bitcoin and ETH, and I think that once we start to see ETH move, I'll definitely start to look to some of those downstream alts, some of those doges of the day that we've picked over the last couple of months to start reallocating some of my capital. But for the time being, based on what we're seeing in terms of on-chain metrics, Bitcoin dominance, I think you want to be in some of the larger cap assets right now. So although I don't have a particular doge of the day, that will be how I'm positioning myself. And if we see ETH start to run and we see that FOMO that CJ just mentioned, feel free to start looking into some of those alts, because I really think that they will be going parabolic once we break into new all-time highs. So exciting time here. Doc, I saw you shaking your head. No doge of the day today for you?
No, I'm just going to stand pat here today, waiting for that final news, and then, like you said, seeing if we do get that FOMO into that announcement.
Very good. Very good. Well, as always, thank you guys so much for watching. And if you want to come hang out in the crypto room, CJ and I are there pretty much 24/7. Had a great time this weekend chatting with some of the customers in the room. And you can head over there and try that at marketrebellion.com/try crypto. You can try the first week for just $7. Lots of exciting stuff happening over there. We got a pro charting service, just added some sentiment data, 24/7 chat, and an extensive education curriculum. Definitely head over there and check that out. It's a lot of fun. Also, if you're looking for a place to trade your crypto, we recommend you head over to investvoyager.com, where you can trade 60 plus digital assets commission free. You can earn up to 12% interest on assets like DOT, and even 10% for just holding USDC, a stable coin. And if you do head over there, be sure to use code REBEL25 when you sign up for $25 free in crypto. But that's all we got for today. Appreciate you guys watching very much. Should be an exciting week, and we'll be back again tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Crypto Byte. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Take care.
Enjoy, guys.